Hello and welcome back. Okay, our last half hour. Are you ready? Let's work on irregular verbs in the past and in the past participle. Are you ready? When was the last time you saw a flying saucer? I've never seen a flying saucer. Saucer es plato pequeño o platillo. Y los que vuelan son platillos volantes. Flying saucer. I've never seen. I have. Contracción. I've, lo he dicho 1000 veces en este programa, pero lo vuelvo a decir por 1001 times. I've never seen a flying saucer. Ante la pregunta, when was the last time you saw? Pasado. Yo digo, I've never seen. When did you last lead troops into battle? I've never led troops into battle. I'm not a leader of troops. I never lead troops into the thick, al grueso de la batalla, into the thick of battle. I have never led troops into battle. I have led people, yes, on special business projects or teaching projects, academic endeavors, academic or teaching initiatives. I have led people. Yes, I have led groups. I have been a group leader. I like to lead people sometimes. I'm a bit of a loner. Okay, so I like to do things by myself, but when I have to lead, I'm willing to lead. So I have led people, I have led groups, but I have never led troops, soldiers, tropas, troops. I've never led troops. Have you ever led troops? Have you ever been a leader in the Army or in the Navy? Have you ever led a group of people? Have you ever been a group leader? Lead, led, led. When did you last lead troops into battle? I've never led troops into battle. When did you last lead a meeting on the question of Albanian refugees? I have never led a meeting on the subject or on the question or on the matter of Albanian refugees. Albanian refugees, there are a lot of Albanian refugees in Italy. They cross the Adriatic Sea from Albania and they disembark on the Italian coast, the Adriatic coast of Italy, near Brindisi, near Bari, and it's a problem for Italy. So they have Albanian refugees, but really they are not refugees because they are not escaping from tyranny, tirania. Maybe 20 years ago, yes, but not now. They're simply escaping from a lower quality of life or standard of living and looking for better opportunities in Italy. And it's interesting, they are only about 200 miles from Italy, very, very close. But I have never led. I have never even called a meeting. Convocar una reunión is to call a meeting. Mantener una reunión es to hold a meeting. Y dirigir una reunión is to lead a meeting, which means you are presiding over the meeting or you are chairing the meeting, si es muy formal. I've never called a meeting, nor held a meeting, nor led a meeting on the subject of Albanian refugees. And now, next question. When did you last leave this television studio in a wheelchair? Yes, question. Excuse me, could you repeat? Could you repeat? Sure. When did you last leave this television studio in a wheelchair? I've never left this studio in a silla de ruedas. I've never left this TV studio in a wheelchair. I have never left this studio with crutches, muletas. I've never left this studio in any way except normal walking out of the studio. Now, when did you last leave your house without remembering your coat? Several times I've left my house without remembering my coat. Question, when did you last lend me $1 million? I've never lent you $1 million. To lend. To lend. To lend is prestar dinero. To lend money. To lend a favor. Okay? En español prestáis atención también. In English, no, we pay attention. We don't lend attention, but sometimes we say, lend me your ear. Okay, préstame tu oído. O sea, escúchame. In Shakespeare, in the play Antony and Cleopatra. No, miento. In the play Julius Caesar, all right, Mark Antony after Caesar is assassinated by the Roman senators and they decide to burn Caesar's body, Mark Antony gives a speech. He gives a speech before they burn the body in Shakespeare. And he said, friends, Romans, and countrymen, amigos, romanos y paisanos, o compatriotas, friends, Romans, and countrymen, lend me your ears. Y creo que lo dice en plural, o Shakespeare lo dice en plural. Friends, Romans, and countrymen, lend me your ears. I have come here to bury Caesar, not to praise him. Do you understand? Mark Antonio, Marco Antonio, el Romano, not Mark Antony the singer, okay? Mark Antony, he gives a speech a funeral speech in front of the funeral pyre, la pira funeraria, of our good friend, Julius Caesar. And he says, friends, Romans, and countrymen, lend me your ears. I have come here to bury Caesar. He venido para enterrar al César, not to praise him, no para alabarle. It's interesting because they didn't bury Caesar, they burned the body. To lend is cuando prestas. You can lend somebody a book. Libro prestado, libro perdido. Hay un dicho aquí en español. You lend a book to somebody, and usually you never see it again, and that person usually never reads it. I don't recommend you lend books, especially if it's a book you really want or that you don't want to lose, because if you lend somebody a book, it can take 1 year, 2 years, or forever to get it back. And sometimes it's embarrassing. You say, Jennifer, listen, do you remember the book I lent you about a year ago? What book? Don't you know the book about, the political situation in Afghanistan? Oh yeah, I need it back. But I haven't read it yet. Well, I need it back. And it's not very pleasant. It's a bit embarrassing. So the first rule is don't lend a book to a friend. And what's interesting is usually people don't ask you for books. When one person lends a book to another, it's because the first person wants the other one to read it. For example, if I lend a book to a friend, it's probably because I insist, you must read this book, it's fantastic, it's fantastic. And I lend it. Not usually because the other person says, what book is this? Oh, this is a book about the history of the Polish Republic. Oh, that's interesting. Usually that's not the case. So don't lend books to friends. But sometimes a friend can say, can I borrow this book? Can I borrow this book? Now, borrow is an interesting verb. We use it all the time in English. And you don't have a verb in Spanish. It's interesting. The verb to borrow, borrow, con un al final. The verb to borrow is simply the opposite of to lend. If you lend something to somebody, that somebody borrows it from. Dar prestado, tomar prestado de. Dar prestado a, tomar prestado de. Okay? So you lend the pen to somebody, and that person borrows the pen from you. If you go to England or to the States, if you go to any English-speaking country, you will hear the word borrow a lot. Because here you say, oye, ¿me dejas un momento tu lápiz? Pues en inglés decimos, can I borrow your pencil for a second? Can I borrow? We are very polite. No tomamos cosas a otros. Oye, ¿me dejas? No, puedo pedir prestado. Okay, can I borrow? Can I? No solemos decir may I en inglés. Eso es muy diferencial y formal. Can I borrow? Can I borrow your pen for a second? And when you go to the bank, one of the reasons for going to a bank is to borrow money. You can borrow money from friends, you can borrow money from family members, you can borrow money from financial institutions. If you borrow money from a bank, the bank usually asks you for some type of guarantee, or the bank already knows you. And so the bank knows that you are a good risk. You are a good credit risk. Are you a good credit risk? If you go to the bank tomorrow and you ask to see the director of the branch bank, the bank manager, and you sit down and you say, I need 30,000 euros. What will happen? Do you think the bank manager will give you 30,000 euros? Así por las buenas. ¿Cómo se dice en inglés así por las buenas? Escuchad bien. Do you think the bank manager will give you 30,000 euros just like that? Justo como eso, literalmente. Así por las buenas. Do you think he'll give you 30,000 euros just like that? Well, some people, yes. There's some people here in this country, they go to the bank and say, Paco, Manolo, Juanjo, Alfredo, I need 30,000 euros. And the bank manager says, when do you need it? Tomorrow morning, no problem. Okay, that's because the bank manager knows you. All right, and the bank manager knows that you are a good risk, or the bank manager wants more business from you. Because when a bank lends you money, the bank knows, or the bank thinks you are a good risk and that the bank can make money. It's a good business to work for you or to work with you. So they lend you money and charge you interest. And they also charge you little commissions, okay? Comisión de estudio. For example, if you ask for 30,000 euros, our friend Manolo, Juanjo, the bank manager, no problem, Felipe. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock when the bank opens, you will have 30,000 fresh euros in your bank account. The bank, of course, will charge 4%, 5%, maybe 6%, maybe 7 or 8, it depends, percent interest. But at the same time, the bank will probably charge maybe 200 euros, 300 euros, maybe 500 euros as a study commission, little commissions, which are little, yeah, but 200 or 400 euros is a lot of money, okay? And do you know how many menús del día you can eat? You know, if you go to a restaurant and you order the menú del día, the menu of the day is maybe 10 euros. So if the bank charges you 300 euros as a comisión de 1% de comisión de estudio, o 0.50, that would be 150 euros. But if the bank charges you 1% for the study commission on granting you the 30,000, that's the equivalent of 30 menus of the day that you have lost like that. Okay? If the bank doesn't charge you that commission, it means you can eat for free the menu of the day for a month and a half practically. All right? But so banks have reasons to say yes when they lend you money, but they either know you or they ask for some type of guarantee. Because if you disappear the next day or you die the next day, okay, then the bank needs that money back. So the bank runs a big risk. The bank runs, corre un riesgo, a big risk. Yes, because you see, when the bank gives you money, because you ask for a loan or because you want to borrow 30,000 euros, the bank gives you that money or lends you. No es que te lo dé, te lo presta. The bank lends you that money, and that money doesn't belong to the bank. That money belongs to other depositors, other bank customers. So the bank is playing with other people's money. So they need to be conservative by obligation. It's their responsibility to be conservative and to study every loan. Do they do it? No, not always, not always. Banks often lend money to big organizations that are very successful. And sometimes these big organizations crash and have problems. And it creates problems for the banks. And it creates una reacción en cadena, a chain reaction of bank problems, and sometimes a bank failure. Okay, to lend money and to borrow money, to lend a book, to borrow a book, to lend money to a friend. Prestas dinero a un amigo, pierdes el dinero y pierdes el amigo. That's very true, okay? Don't lend money to friends. Well, that's very difficult. If a friend comes to me and asks for money, if a friend comes to me and wants to borrow money, the friend says, Richard, I need 10,000 euros. If the person is a friend, I will give him 10,000 euros. If I have enough, if it doesn't cause financial problems for me, I will give him 10,000 euros. And I will never ask him to return the money. I will wait to see if he returns the money. And if he doesn't, I will say nothing. But I know that his conscience is, half the time they won't return the money. So, it's not true that if, retracto lo dicho, I take back what I said. I said to you at the beginning, don't lend money to friends. Well, no, lend money to friends, but you will probably lose the friend, okay? What I should say is never borrow money from a friend. Never go to a friend to ask for money. If you desperately need money, ask money, borrow it from a family member, borrow it from the bank, borrow it from a lending association. Do anything, but never from a friend, if the person is really a friend, because you will lose the friend. And you shouldn't do that to that person. Okay, so don't lend money or borrow money from a friend. Next one, when was the last time you let me use your car? I've never let you use my car. My car's very powerful, very dangerous. Do you know how to drive it? All right. I've never let you drive my car. My father let me drive his car, I remember. My father had a Buick, you say here. A Buick is a car that belongs to the General Motors Corporation. My mother had a Pontiac, which also is General Motors. My father always bought General Motors cars because his father, my grandfather, bought shares, comprar acciones, of General Motors in the middle of the 1930s. You remember, the 1930s were famous last century for the Great Depression. Everything was depressed. There was no inflation, there was deflation, okay? And so many people were poor, many didn't have anything, and the stock prices, the prices in the New York Stock Exchange for the shares, las cotizaciones, were very low. And my grandfather decided to sell some pieces of land and buy some shares because the prices were very good. And one of the corporations was General Motors, okay? And at that time, there were 4 companies basically competing in the United States in the automotive industry. El sector de la automoción, decís aquí. En inglés, automation, ojo, automation es automatización. Es como la cibernética o la informática. Automation. Aquí se dice automoción para los automóviles, pero en inglés automation no tiene nada que ver con automoción, es automatización. Automotive, okay, the automobile industry or the automotive industry had 4 competitors. General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, and American Motors. Now, my grandfather bought shares in General Motors. Now, General Motors is an interesting corporation because in 1915, going back almost 100 years, in 1915 and 1920, clearly, Ford Motor Company was number 1. Clearly. Henry Ford had created a powerhouse. He created a company that was apparently unstoppable. Okay? He created the Model T. Puede ser de cualquier color, siempre que sea negro. He standardized production. He gained efficiencies. He reduced costs. Yes. And he created the Model T and he changed the world. Henry Ford changed the world. Really. He's the most important man in the past 200 years in creating what we call consumer society. He reduced the costs of cars 9 times. And if you look at photographs, for example, of Chicago or New York City or Baltimore, any American city, you take a photograph of the city in 1908, and there are some cars, not many. 1908. 6 years later, you see a photograph from 1914, the same streets of the same cities, and you have traffic jams. That's because of Henry Ford. He decided to work relentlessly, sin piedad, implacablemente, to reduce the costs of manufacturing cars, of making cars, which included the institution of the assembly line. Assembly line, literalmente, línea de ensamblaje, pero aquí decís cadena de montaje, the assembly line. And that was one important ingredient in reducing costs and gaining efficiencies in production. Before Henry Ford, never. It was not part of the industrial base, was to reduce costs. And Henry Ford changed that. So he became the king of the car industry or the automotive industry. But in the 1920s, very slowly, very gradually, things started to change. Okay, things started to change in the 1920s because Alfred Sloan, de nombre Sloan, escrito Sloan, Alfred Sloan was named or was appointed chairman of General Motors. Motores Generales, General Motors, very simple name, but General Motors brought together 5 makes that previously had competed. 5 different makes of cars were brought together in a merger to create General Motors. And those were Cadillac, el Cadillac, ¿te suena? Cadillac, Buick, la U manda aquí, Buick, decís aquí Buick, Pontiac, okay, Oldsmobile, and Chevrolet. And those 5 makes, which previously were independent, were together in General Motors. And Alfred Sloan decided, how can I differentiate these different makes? We have too many competing makes in one company. So he decided to categorize them by level of income of the buyer, okay, by the class. Because of course, economically in every country you have a lower class, a lower middle class, a middle class, an upper middle class, and an upper class or high class. The lower class don't have much money. The lower middle class has some, etc. And Mr. Sloan decided to differentiate his cars and to categorize them for different social classes. So the cheapest of the General Motors cars, and still today it's the same, it hasn't changed in 90 years. The least expensive car in General Motors is the Chevrolet. The Chevrolet. The Chevrolet is the common man's car, del hombre de la calle. And the next category was the Pontiac. In the middle was the Oldsmobile, and then the Buick, and then for the rich people, or the people who liked to show off, the Cadillac. Yeah, the Cadillac. And that was General Motors. So, my father, when he had to start buying cars, he started buying General Motors cars. Because his father, my grandfather, had bought shares in General Motors in the 1930s when all the prices of shares were very low. Okay? And only once in his life, in 1957, my father bought a Ford. And I remember that Ford. And he had problems with it. And he sold it after 1 year, saying, never again. Okay, at General Motors. So when I got my driving license, in Inglés británico se dice driving license, in Americano, drivers. When I got my driver's license, I didn't have a car, of course. I was only 16. But my father let me, me permitió, me dejó, let me drive his car, and my mother let me drive her car. And my father had a Buick, and my mother had a Pontiac. And I preferred the Pontiac because it was more sporty. It was a fast car. My mother didn't know that she had a fast car. That was funny. My mother had a very fast car, and she didn't know it. And I remember when I was 14 or 15, before I started driving, I remember the whole family went to the dealership to buy a Pontiac with my mother. And my sister and I, we saw a beautiful car. Hey, this car is really nice. And my mother said, yes, it is nice. And my father said, well, how much is it? And perhaps $7,000. And my father said, okay. But what my father didn't know, and my mother didn't know, was that she was buying a car with 400 cubic centimeters bajo el capó, a very powerful engine. And 2 years later, when I started driving, and my mother let me drive her car, I said, wow, this is a monster. So when I was 16, I was lucky to have a very fast car. And it looked normal, but it was very fast. Oh, okay. They're telling me I have to stop. No me da la gana. Realmente preferiría continuar. I don't feel like stopping, but I have to stop. So, it's been a pleasure. I hope you've enjoyed the program. I hope you've enjoyed the program. I'll be back again tomorrow with more of Vaughan and Vivo. Thank you very much.